Thousands of years ago, there came a night that lasted a generation. Kings froze to death in their castles, same as the shepherds in their huts. And women smothered their babies rather than see them starve, and wept and felt the tears freeze on their cheeks. In that darkness, the White Walkers came for the first time. They swept through cities and kingdoms, riding their dead horses, hunting with their packs of pale spiders, big as hounds.
Good evening, everyone. This will probably be a short video. I'm not going to really talk about Game of Thrones, how it should be, at least the show. I mean, it's got to take the show for what it's doing, like it or hate it. I just know I like the books. That's really all I wait for. The show, the actors, you know, it's I like them. But man, all right, let's talk about the long night, the battle. And you heard on that before the intro that the old man telling the story of the long night. And the thing about it is, well, the long night lasted a generation. It wasn't just a one night that just felt long. I mean, it alludes to kings freezing to death in their castles. You know, same as the shepherds in their huts. Women smothering their babies rather than seeing them starve. And then White Walkers coming through for the first time, sweeping through cities and kingdoms, riding their dead horses, and hunting with their packs of pale spiders as big as hounds. So what I would have loved, and maybe we'll see this in the books, we'll read this in the books, but what I would have loved would be if they had done the long night, they should have made it at least a season or 2 seasons long. Not make it one battle, but make it many battles, make it a war. Just like the Game of Thrones, how they had a lot of battles, the wars, and how they maneuvered to defeat each other, not just in the battlefield, but also through other strategies, political strategies. But again, against the White Walkers, against the Night King, you're not going to win politically. You're going to have to win on the battlefield. So that would have been great to see, but whatever. I understand nuances of Hollywood and all that jazz. Well, actually, I don't, but I assume I know. Okay, so what I'm gonna go and do is just break things down as far as, all right, let's say let's say you had to have a battle, or you know, maybe I'll expand it a little bit and say, hey, what if it was more of a war? Like, what if you actually had a Night King that was smart? And it may be hard to read, but I'm just gonna go over. I mean, I'm not one of those YouTubers that makes a lot of videos about movies and shows and things like that. It'd be nice, and where you see them making millions of money just on talking about it. Isn't that just weird? But anyways, Long Night, the season 8, episode 3, the battle strategy. What I like. Okay, so so a lot of people are making a lot of videos of it, and they do a great job. I love watching everyone making these videos about it. So I'm not gonna go in that context, but also the battle strategy was so piss poor in this episode that pretty much anybody can talk about anything and it would have just been a better battle strategy. And for me, I just like to break it down in an assessment. All right, so you've got the Army of Fire, you've got advantages and disadvantages, and you've got the Army of Ice, the advantages and disadvantages. Now, if I was the Night King, or if I wasn't even the Night King, but if the Night King was just smart, and I would have hoped the Night King was smart, but who knows? So, okay, at this point, the Night King has one undead dragon that can breathe and take down walls, castle walls, pretty much anything except for a rock that's in front of Jon Snow, but let's not talk about that. Okay, so the Night King, he can raise the dead, manipulate weather, bringing with him blizzards, and can throw ice spears that can take down full-grown dragons. Then you've got White Walkers, and it's unknown the quantity, how many White Walkers there are, but they share the same powers as the Night King. I would guess to a lesser degree, but they're so cold they can snuff out fire, so they're immune to fire, just like the Night King was immune to dragon fire. It's very weird. They have a very, very large army. They have specialized undead creatures. I forgot to add in horses. Like giants, in the books, spiders. I don't think we saw that in the show. Horses. I should probably put, I don't know. Well, in the show, they also had elephants and bears. So they have a lot of undead creatures to be utilized. They don't need water. They don't need food. They don't need rest. The Night King and White Walkers, they can only die from dragon glass or Valyrian steel. Whites as well, but those whites can be destroyed by fire if there is no dragon glass or Valyrian steel used on them. Disadvantages that they have. Well, if you kill the Night King, the entire army of the dead will be destroyed. If you kill any White Walker, any undead, that White Walker raised will also be destroyed. They don't have any range, except for the Night King and White Walkers that can throw ice spears, but I doubt if there's only just the Night King or the White Walker throwing ice spears, it's not going to do that much of a dent. They obviously target bigger enemies. Now, just on the advantages alone, you don't have to settle on you don't have to settle on taking out Winterfell. What I would have done was just held back. If they were intent on taking Winterfell, bring that blizzard and just wait it out and just see what the opposition does. I mean, you're on the attack. You don't have defensive fortifications. Well, you don't really need any. No one's getting close to you. You've got a very large undead army. Right when people attack and they kill off your army killed some of theirs. You just raise them back. You just raise some of the dead back, and you've got your army again. And any dragons that come close, you've got your White Walkers or just the Night King just going ahead and just killing those dragons from a range. Now, the thing is, I wish we would have known how many White Walkers there were. What would have been great would be seeing again a season or 2 seasons long of just the war of just the Long Night. Just call the seasons the Long Night. Just have change it up and you know, after, I don't know, just don't make it one night that's just the same length as any other night. It just it's pretty stupid, but all right. Because what would have been great is just seeing, like I was saying before, oh my goodness, just seeing White Walkers fight in the Long Night, the one battle, or just the Night King fight at all would have been just great. Because if we never got to see the Night King fight, we've only seen a few White Walkers fight, but to actually see them actually see how powerful White Walkers are, and then compared to All right, now you're facing the Night King. How much more powerful can the Night King be than just a White Walker? And then we get to see just how powerful the Night King would have been. That would have been an incredible thing. Oh, I need to raise this up a bit so you guys can see. So, just to seeing a White Walker with its own army, just sieging other castles or towns and villages and things like that, while the Night King goes just pretty much, rather than pulling a General Robert E. Lee, should have just marched past Winterfell and just gone straight to King's Landing, and then see what the Army of Fire would have done. So the Army of Fire, let's talk about them a little bit. All right. They had no chance if the Night King was smart, because they need water, they need food. More importantly, they need warmth and they need rest. Without rest, they're just gonna tire out and die. And if they die, there's more for the undead. Warmth, they need to keep warm. Without warmth, they'll just freeze to death. And with warmth, you need fire, you need supplies, you need wood, you need the fire, keep the fire going. But the thing is, how long can you keep the fire going when, if a White Walker comes close enough, it can just snuff the fire out? Or even the Night King. The Night King should just play it from afar. But here's the thing. If the Night King is too far, you do have advantages with the Army of Fire. But again, let's go with the disadvantages. The second disadvantage is you have limited army, and the more that die, the more the enemy can raise as undead. Okay, so let's talk about the advantages. And these are some good advantages. Okay, you got 2 dragons, which will just wreak havoc on whites, on the undead. Except for the White Walkers. We haven't seen a dragon battling a White Walker, and guess is the White Walker can do the same thing that the Night King could do. And so, well, dragons just aren't as powerful as White Walkers, which is kind of weird to think about. Three-eyed raven Bran, he's an unimaginably useful scout. He can warg into animals. He saw him at least warg into ravens. We don't know what he did the rest of the time, but just having him go in, warg out, and just seeing where the armies are, armies of the undead, the Night King and White Walkers, spot them out, have him talk to some commander that relays it out to different factions of the army, and saying, okay, well, Jon and Daenerys, this is where the Night King is. You don't have to worry about him engaging in battle, but there's White Walkers. Take out the White Walkers, you take out a good bunch of whites. That would be a good strategy. If they knew about Arya, rather than Arya just being, oh, I could sneak in and kill anybody type of thing. Arya doesn't tell anybody how useful she is. She just whatever. So you've got a great assassin with Arya, which, if she could have done it, kill the Night King with a whole bunch of White Walkers surrounding him as guards. Well, without guards, I think she would been able to take him out, except for, well, probably do have to take on Viserion, who is the undead dragon. So that needs to be done before Arya can assassinate the Night King. Luckily, the Viserion was distracted with trying to take out Jon. Now, greatest thing about the Army of the Living, Army of Fire, is the defensive fortifications. They have a castle. I mean, you still have to get past all the defensive fortifications if you're the Army of the Undead. We pretty much easily saw how they got past, but then again, the Army of Fire weren't too smart. Of course, against dragons, yeah, At least Viserion, the undead dragon, it's going to be hard to defend against that with a castle fortification, unless you're like Queen Cersei with a whole bunch of crazy ballistas. Now, you have a fierce light cavalry with the Dothraki. You know, they're great fighting on foot and they're capable archers. What people don't realize, and I'm not sure if the show alluded to it a lot, but the Dothraki bows outrange the bows used in the Seven Kingdoms. And I would think they would utilize that ability to use those bows pretty well. In the Dothraki wiki of Ice and Fire, there's, according to, all right, so it says here, the Dothraki are nomadic warriors. They ride better than any Westerosi knight. The Dothraki fight from horseback with warriors wielding arcs, curved bows, and whips. The bows the Dothraki use outrange the bows used in the Seven Kingdoms. You see that? Why charge needlessly? Even though it was a cool effect, you've got some of the best archers than even those in the Seven Kingdoms with the Dothraki. But you don't utilize them that way. They should have stayed within the castles, on top of the crenellations. They don't have to worry about anything except for ice spears and an undead dragon. But the undead dragon could have been kept away by the two dragons that were rode by Daenerys and Jon. Plus, hopefully they could have figured out ballistas, but oh well. Now the Unsullied, they're so yeah, just having them up there and protecting the castle, but the walls just would have been perfect. But then there's those Unsullied, which could have also been utilized in the same way, not with bows and arrows, but with the phalanx formation that they're supposedly really good at fighting. For example, we've seen it in the Battle of the Bastards. They used the phalanx formation as well. At least a shield wall, which is very similar to a phalanx formation, except it's not the phalanx isn't really a shield wall. But the same concept. What I would have liked is to have seen a couple of Northmen to maybe train some, or at least bring some to the battle and utilize the same shield wall like they did in the Battle of the Bastards, or train the Dothraki to use bigger shields. Just like it would have been great to have seen some of the Northmen train the Dothraki how to fight in a defensive position within the walls. And maybe Jorah giving them armor. Remember the fight scene between Jorah and Dothraki? And the reason why Jorah won was because he was wearing heavy armor that the Dothraki's Eric couldn't get past. So it would have been good to have a little bit of immersion between the army of the Dothraki and the Unsullied with those within the Seven Kingdoms. Of course, the only ones within the Seven Kingdoms would be the people of the North, the army of the North, and these just within history. It would have been good. I mean, that's the great thing about the story of A Song of Ice and Fire, is just the historical context, at least. The official, what they say is the history. But of course we know that's not the real history. But let's not talk about all that stuff for here. Let's just have fun with this. So you've got the Unsullied. And so, I mean, all of this, we'll just focus here. All right, so you've got trebuchets and maybe catapults. I didn't see any catapults. And, you know, if you built those or you had those, you should have tried to make some ballistas. Put them inside the walls, castle walls. I've never, ever seen a defensive fortification ever in any history battle where the defenders placed their trebuchets and their catapults outside of the castle fortifications or wherever that they're defending from. You always put them behind your walls. It just never happens. And why they did it in the show, in that episode, I have no idea. Maybe it would have been too easy. The oil, when they had that trench fire, they should have known. At least John should have known and said, "Hey, if a White Walker comes close enough, they'll just snuff the fire out." It's happened before. So why they expected it to keep the White Walkers away, I don't understand. But what they could have used that oil for is when the army of the Whites start climbing the walls, just pour some of the oil and light it on fire. It's just gonna keep burning. And if they get piled up and stuff to fire out, throw more oil on the new ones, and then there you go. You keep going. So there's that, and there's all those stakes, wooden stakes that had some jutting out of dragon glass. What should have been made was just dragon glass head arrows. I don't think there were any arrows fired from the army of fire. I didn't see it. Did you? I mean, I think I saw some fire arrows, but I didn't see any dragon glass arrows. I mean, I know there's a limit to how many arrows you'll have, but if you can take out as much enemy as you can with whatever that you have. Actually, I did see arrows within when they were protecting the Bran. So I guess they did have those arrows, but still, I mean, to guard the entire castle would have been good with a lot more arrows. But arrows are expensive. It's hard to get a lot of them. Yeah, I can see that being a problem. But you had Dothraki who are capable archers. Yeah, fire, which would help. Oil and fire. I should probably put that in one. Seasoned war commanders, which we didn't really see any good commanding occurring at all. And seasoned warriors. I mean, just they've got plot armor, which is really good. Still, I mean, you have a lot of smart people, and they didn't do any smart things, which is just aggravating. But yeah, the horses against that huge army, and of course, what should have been done is taking out any of the special creatures, giants. I think we saw elephant for just a half. It's not even a half second, maybe like 2 frames. A dead elephant where we see the Dothraki run into, and we don't know any other things that we saw. I mean, the White Walkers were on horses. I doubt there's any whites riding horses. We didn't see any spiders. We saw 1 giant. That's it. We didn't see any other bears. But I could see the cavalry as being useful, but you really need to make sure you're not going to run into something pretty bad. And the problem with the light cavalry is it's close in fighting. I think what would have been better is just to have just a heavier cavalry, which just can mow down light ground forces such as the undead, the whites. So something more of a I don't know, what would I say? Something more towards the effect of the Westerosi knights fully armored charging with the lance would have been great, but of course they didn't have any of those. But the light cavalry could have been utilized mostly to probably charge at any White Walker that was out there and taking them out. And I think that would have been good, is to have some light cavalry in reserve to prevent any White Walker from getting close, or making some of the undead White Army stay back to defend the White Walkers. That way the Dothraki can't charge. So you've got a lot of back and forth, a lot of strategy, a lot of tactics that need to be utilized that on the spot in order to gain an advantage. And the advantage to the army of the undead, I would say the army of ice, is pretty simple. It's just a war of attrition. Basically, the only thing that held the Night King and the army of the undead back was that wall. Once that wall came down, they had to fight. I mean, that wall was built on magic, etc. So there really wasn't any taking it to the Night King and stopping him. I don't even know how they stopped him 8,000 years ago in the series, but there's really no reason to press an attack with the Night King and the White Walkers, especially a fortification that could easily just be passed or just wait. You waited thousands of years. Is that 8,000? Yeah, you wait 8,000 years. You're probably the most patient entity around, yet you need to take. You can't even wait for your blizzard to catch up. You just had to go in front of your blizzard. I mean, it's just, I don't get it. Like it's. I wish they would just put in a gamer as someone to just ask. It's like, hey, you play a video game with strategy. What would you do? They would have been better than any of the writers. Do the writers not play video games, strategy games? Does anyone working with Game of Thrones that's not George R. R. Martin, and of course George R. R. Martin hasn't really been working with the producers of the show since I think season 4, and that's why we've seen this downhill thing. But still, it's just a weird thing. And just talking about strategy, I could just talk about strategy just day in, day out. I just enjoy it. It's just pretty easy. And I think that's part of the great thing about the show, was not just the political intrigue, but the military intrigue. Just the abilities of those commanding the armies, those like, for example, Robb Stark won every battle, lost the war pretty simply, just by the political covert dealings and assassinations and things like that. But it would have been, and of course, same thing with Stanley Baratheon, right? When he got assassinated by Melisandre, that dark thing that came out of her womb. But you've got all these things that you could utilize that's been in the book, that's been on the show before, and none of it comes to fruition. What would have been great is to see how was it Nymeria, the dire wolf that Arya met in previous season, is to either have that dire wolf army come, or if led by a dire wolf but a wolf army, that's still pretty big. Have them come to fight off the undead as well. At least, if not, have Bran warg into one, or Nymeria or one of them, and just lead the army. But we didn't see any of that. But I mean, even with what they had, I think the army of fire could have held out, and it would have been a more interesting battle than the battle that was shown. I mean, to see what's great about a show that has smart characters and utilize their intelligence to fight off an overwhelming force is to see how they're doing. To do everything right and still be losing is probably the most debilitating thing and depressing thing for anyone fighting in that battle ever. It's demoralizing. So to put that in there in an episode, or even more episodes, have it a whole season or two, it's just seeing how everything is done right and you just keep losing ground. You just keep losing ground. You keep losing. You realize that the way that they've been fighting, like they fight for the Game of Thrones, is not the same way that they can fight against the Army of the Ice. And thus, they need to change the way that they fight, because it's a different fight. That would have been a great ending to A Song of Ice and Fire, is realizing that all the ways that we would fight each other, or they would fight each other, all the I don't know what you call them, all the houses would fight each other. They can't do that same thing against the Night King. And just ending it on the last two seasons against the Night King would have been great. You've got all this build up, but that was never utilized. But I need to stop talking about that. Just the battle itself, whether if it's a full out war or just one battle, the battle could have been handled a lot better. I like seeing these things, at least within the cinematic world. If we think about what was that? Starship Troopers. One thing I liked about Starship Troopers, even though they still did do it right, is actually they did it all right. You know how the first alien came and it still took out 3, 4, 5, 6 troopers, 7, 8, 9, whatever. I know it's just one of them. And it took them not just a few seconds to kill, but it took like a couple minutes for them to actually kill it. And they're all happy. It's like, yeah, we took one down, even though it took like 10 or 12. I don't know how many. But it felt like there's a lot that died. And then all of a sudden they see hundreds of those. just that thought. All right. It's like, imagine they just destroyed thousands of whites, and then the thing is, they just see another, and those thousands of whites maybe took out 20 or 30, or maybe even 100 or 200, and then a White Walker just walks up, raises the 200, 300 that died on the Army of Fire, and then they keep pressing on. And that's just demoralizing right there. You probably minimized your deaths as best you could, and still they just keep pressing on like it's nothing. So then you have to change up your strategy. You can't just keep doing the same thing and expect to win. You need to change it up. And just to how they would change it up, that would be some smart writing. That would be some great strategy. That would be some utilizing some great tactics used in the past in warfare, at least the stories and the history books and things like that. Those were always pretty good. Anyways, that's it. I would love to have a talk one day, maybe with other people about it. It's like, I do know some people have other views of what they would have done, but for me, it would never mattered. If I was the Night King, I wouldn't have engaged the army at Winterfell. I would have either waited it out or just left maybe half the army. Yeah, you're not supposed to split the army, but if you have an army that's overwhelming in the first place, doesn't matter. And you've got White Walkers, which can defend against dragons anyway. Dragons have been pretty much useless against the army of the undead. They could, if they aren't guarded by White Walkers and the Night King, they could take out swaths of undead that get too close. But I mean, the undead just seem limitless. So the only way I would imagine is that you have to go after the White Walkers and the Night King. You have to, otherwise you're just fighting a losing battle, losing war. And what would have been great is to actually see the idea that the Long Night lasting not just one night, but lasting a generation, or at least a couple of years, and therefore make it a season or two long. And within that, there's still infighting within the Seven Kingdoms, which would have been pretty great. As you see the ones who are still fighting for the throne, and then you just see him getting picked apart by the undead, and then all of a sudden you're still fighting them, but it's a whole different fight. All right, so thank you for watching this. If you did watch it all the way through, hey, if you're just somebody that wants to talk about Game of Thrones strategy wise, I'd love to talk about that. If you just want to talk about Game of Thrones book, or how bad the series is, the television series, we can talk about that too. Just on things to talk about rather than always talking about how the world is we're winters here, isn't it, in the real world? But anyways, that's for another night. All right, thank you. See you guys next video.